Biden expresses U.S. readiness for dialogue with Russia, China, and North Korea on nuclear threat. How hurricane conspiracy theories took over social media and who the implementation of the victory plan depends on. We will talk about this with Uriel Epstein, the Chief Executive Officer of the Renewed Democracy Initiative. Uriel, glad to see you and thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Uriel, President Volodymyr Zelensky has said that while certain additional issues regarding the victory plan need to be agreed on with Ukraine's partners, he is confident that partners have the necessary potential to implement it. It is worth to mention that during a visit to the U.S. in late September, Zelensky presented the victory plan to U.S. President Joe Biden as well as presidential candidates Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. Do you expect breakthrough from Zelensky's victory plan? What do you expect from partners' feedback on victory plan and when it can be? How do you think?
Well, I don't think we're going to see anything new until after November 5th. Because so long as the presidential election is in full swing in the United States, you're not going to see any massive changes in American politics and American policy. And unfortunately, without major initiatives, without major changes on the United States side, I think it's unlikely that you're going to see any, particularly significant initiatives on the European side, because ultimately I think America remains the leader in this regard. So I think anything we might see will likely happen after the election. And then obviously you'll have one of two options. Either Kamala Harris will be the president-elect, or Donald Trump will be the president-elect. If it's going to be President Kamala Harris, then I think you're going to see sort of a continuation and perhaps a slight increase in what the U.S. has been willing to do over the course of the transition period and then when she comes into office. If, on the other hand, it's going to be President Donald Trump, then I think you might see a flurry of activity between November and January, where President Biden will be in his lame duck period, but nevertheless, he will still have power over American foreign policy. And therefore, I do think you're going to see kind of a massive amount of action before President Trump comes back into office. But obviously, I predict that if he does come back into office, you're going to see a significant and sharp decrease in what the United States is willing to do under a new Trump administration.
Well, we will talk about Trump and Kamala Harris a little bit later, but now I want to talk about Biden more, because the Ukraine Defense Contact Group, also known as the Ramstein format, would not be meeting at leader level in the near future, reported by German TV channel ZDF. About details, according to official information, U.S. President Joe Biden is scheduled to travel to Germany on Thursday, the 17th of October, for a visit that was previously postponed due to Hurricane Milton. However, the president's visit will be significantly shortened to a single day, Friday, the 18th of October. Should we believe the official U.S. reasoning that this change of plans was solely due to Hurricane Milton, which is approaching Florida? Or was the real reason related to Ukraine itself? Will the White House return to the ideas that have now been postponed? When might this become possible?
So I think, look, I think fundamentally it actually does have to do with the hurricanes. I think you had back-to-back, horrifically damaging hurricanes in Florida, in the American Southeast. And this is something that, we haven't seen happen in years. So I do want to highlight that what is happening just with the weather in America is almost unprecedented. So I don't want your viewers to read too much into the fact that President Biden, canceled his earlier trip and then on this new postponed trip made it so short. But I also think on the other side of this is the simple fact that, like I said, I don't think we're going to see any massive changes in either American or European posture over the course of the next few weeks or even, potentially the next couple of months. And I think that also has played a role. There's an element of realism here, which is to say that even if Biden were to go longer, even if there were to be a more concerted effort on the part of the allies to, fundamentally change or increase this support, I don't think you're going to see that until after the American election. So I do think that played a role in his calculation of why spend the extra time in Europe if the likelihood of a significant breakthrough right now is fairly low.
Baseless conspiracy theories about weather modification and false claims about disaster relief efforts have continued to spread on X in recent days, with misinformation about Hurricane Milton adding to a mountain of false rumors about Hurricane Helen and its aftermath. The spread has sparked a push from local and federal officials, along with some politicians who have decried the spread of misinformation and outlandish claims about the origins of the storms. Why false conspiracy theories about Hurricane Milton continue to swirl despite outcry from officials?
Well, unfortunately, misinformation and disinformation are both incredibly common, not only in the United States, but around the world. And you're seeing a significant number of very, very far-right extremist figures spreading that misinformation in the U.S. In fact, what I just find shocking, I mean, a friend of mine was telling me about this, and, you know, that she's involved in some of this work, where FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, was forced to move some of its operations in one of the southeast states because National Guard troops saw threats from local militia. So there are local militia that are believing this information and are actually threatening the very people who are trying to save lives during this natural tragedy and this natural disaster. And that's something that, you know, I don't think it's unprecedented, but it's certainly much worse than it has been. So this is something that's been, I think, latched onto by right-wing extremists in the U.S. They are exacerbating it. They are sharing it. And of course, I think that this has not gone unnoticed by our adversaries abroad. Vladimir Putin doesn't just make lies up out of whole cloth. The Russian, the Chinese, the Iranian strategies regarding disinformation in the West is to latch on to whatever disinformation already exists and make it worse. So I have almost no doubt that given the prevalence of disinformation regarding these hurricanes, that President Biden is dealing with our foreign adversaries actually amplifying this disinformation and using this as an opportunity to further weaken the U.S.
Uriel, yes, President Joe Biden has said that the United States is ready to talk to Russia, China and North Korea to address nuclear security issues. There is no benefit to our nations or the world to forestall progress on reducing nuclear arsenals, Biden said. And also, one quote is, reducing the nuclear threat is important not despite the dangers of today's world, but precisely because of them. U.S. President Joe Biden is ready to talk to Russia, China and North Korea, but are these countries ready to talk to U.S.?
It's a great question. I think one of the strategies that authoritarian regimes use to try to weaken the West is to pretend to be ready for these negotiations and then to use negotiations in order to weaken the Western response to their malevolent activities. And so we have to be very careful as we go into these types of conversations to not allow countries like Iran, North Korea, Russia, and so forth to use negotiations as an opportunity to prevent Western reactions and responses to their provocations. We've seen this time and time again, where Russia, Iran, and China and others have tried to leverage negotiations in order to weaken Western resolve and say, look, don't do anything against us right now. We're in the middle of negotiations. They take this extra time in order to rearm, in order to double down. And by the time the negotiations conclude with no measurable difference, with no measurable impact, then those authoritarian regimes are in a stronger position to further attack the West. So that's what concerns me. Now, could there be an opportunity for President Biden in nuclear conversations with these countries? Perhaps. We don't know. Certainly the single greatest danger, one of the single greatest dangers facing the world is, of course, a nuclear catastrophe. And therefore, you know, any kind of conversations along those lines are something that should be taken very seriously. But we should not allow nuclear blackmail or the threat of nuclear escalation by malevolent actors to weaken our resolve in the face of authoritarian threats.
Well, the Steadfast Noon exercise started on Monday and will run for about 2 weeks. It will be led by Belgium and the Netherlands, use 8 military bases and involve 2,000 personnel and 60 aircraft from 13 nations. Bomber aircraft and fighter jets that can carry nuclear warheads are taking part. No live munitions are used. The bulk of the exercise is being held around 900 kilometers from Russia in the North Sea. Moscow has been informed about the drills, NATO officials said, but should we expect, for example, a reaction from dictator Putin?
Oh, of course. He's going to react to whatever he can. But I think it's incredibly important that we have these drills because so often as Putin rattles his nuclear saber and says that if the West continues to support Ukraine, he might be forced to use a nuclear weapon. Well, it's important for us to remind him and for us to remind other dictators that the West is not only militarily superior to our authoritarian foes, but that we too are nuclear powers. And this reminder, I think, comes at a very important time when Putin continues to try to leverage nuclear blackmail in order to minimize Western support for Ukraine. And I've said this before many times in various appearances, that we cannot allow Putin to use nuclear blackmail in order to deter us from doing exercises like this, from providing support to Ukraine, from providing support to Taiwan and our other allies, because by giving in to this nuclear blackmail, we would ironically be making the very outcome that we are most afraid of more likely to happen. Because, of course, our enemies understand that if they see something that we're afraid of, then they are going to double down and to threaten that very thing a lot more than they would otherwise. It's no accident that, a few months ago, or maybe almost a year ago, when CNN came out with a report that said that the Biden administration was very seriously afraid of Russia using a nuclear weapon in 2022, that dictator Putin almost immediately after that report came out, within a week, was once again threatening the use of a nuclear weapon because he saw that this was the thing we were most afraid of. And therefore, this was the thing that he decided to use in order to try to deter us. So by telegraphing what we're afraid of, we are making it more likely that our dictators will actually do that very thing.
Well, I also wanted to talk about U.S. election polls because voters in the U.S. go to the polls on the 5th of November to elect their next president. The election was initially a rematch of 2020, but it was appended in July when President Joe Biden ended his campaign and endorsed Vice President Kamala Harris. The big question now is, will America get its first woman president or second Donald Trump term? As election day approaches, we will be keeping track of the polls and seeing what effect the campaign has on the race for the White House. But now, who is ahead, in your opinion, Harris or Trump?
So who is ahead today and who will win in November could very well be two different things. It's impossible to predict. As far as I can tell right now, Kamala Harris is ahead, but she is ahead by a very small margin, which is to say that this is anyone's race to win or lose. Before President Biden dropped out, I was willing to predict with a fair bit of confidence that he was going to drop out. And I even roughly had a sense of when he would be doing so. I am not willing today to predict who will win in November. I think maybe Kamala Harris has a 55% chance likelihood and Donald Trump has a 45% chance likelihood. But it could truly go either way. I will say that if if Vice President Harris had chosen perhaps a different nominee, perhaps if she had chosen the governor of Pennsylvania, I think perhaps this race would be in a different place because Pennsylvania is, of course, one of the key states in this election where if the Democrats are able to win in Pennsylvania, that drastically increases their likelihood of winning the election. But of course, again, who can know? And so, unfortunately, I don't think I can give you a better answer than that.
Yes, President Joe Biden warned Iran of the consequences in case of an assassination attempt on Donald Trump or former U.S. officials. He noted that any attempts would be considered an act of war, reports the Washington Post. A U.S. National Security Council spokesman Sean Saved said that Washington had been monitoring Iranian threats against Trump for many years, starting when he was president. What do you know about Iran's alleged threats to assassinate Trump, and why?
Well, look, I mean, Iran, like Russia, like China, and other countries like that, will do whatever they can to meddle in internal American affairs. That's why it's important for Americans to understand that what happens in the world affects us here at home, that we cannot put our heads in the sand and ignore the threats that dictators make against us and against our allies. So, of course, I think that the threats of an Iranian assassination of former President Donald Trump are incredibly serious. I think if they could do something like that, they absolutely would, if for no other reason than to sow chaos in the United States and in the rest of the free world. That is the goal of dictators like the ones that sit in Tehran and in Moscow. Their goal is chaos in the free world, and it's our job to prevent them from being able to achieve that goal. The first way we do that is to recognize that they are working together in order to do so. Iran threatens Donald Trump in a similar way to how Russia, if they could, would threaten Vice President Kamala Harris. And I should go further that Iran actually has a history of making such threats against American citizens, people living on American shores. In fact, a very close personal friend of mine, Masih Alinejad, is a journalist for Voice of America. She is from Iran. She is known for opposing the forced hijab, the forcing women to wear the hijab. And the Iranians tried to kill or kidnap her 3 times in Brooklyn. And in fact, the way they did so, at least one of the times, was to hire Russian organized crime in order to try to assassinate her in New York. So again, you can see how these different elements work together against the forces of freedom and against their own dissidents, even those living in America. So I think these threats are serious, and I think it is incumbent upon the United States and our security forces to do everything we can to respond against them forcefully. And one of the most important ways that we can do so is by supporting our allies like Ukraine in their direct confrontation against these forces of authoritarianism.
Well, I heard that Trump requests military aircraft and vehicles amid Iran threat. Is it right, or what do you think about this news?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's not uncommon for political campaigns to make various security-related requests. And I think it's then the responsibility of the Secret Service to determine what types of security requests are realistic for them to fulfill, which ones will have the most benefit, and so forth. So, I don't have any inside knowledge as to whether or not those military aircraft would make a substantial difference in the security of President Trump's campaign. I do know that they did make this request. Whether or not it's fulfilled, whether or not it's necessary, something that I'll leave up to the Secret Service to decide. That having been said, I will say that there is a reckoning happening in the U.S. right now with regards to the Secret Service. This is an organization with egg on its face, right? It's an organization that has allowed now 2 ultimate attempts on Donald Trump's life. It's an organization that has seen its agents the victims of carjackings. There have been scandals regarding some of its agents abroad. So I think it's an agency right now that is in, I don't want to say disarray, but certainly it's trying to find its footing. It doesn't know what to do next. And I think we're seeing a response to that in Congress, where there have been multiple efforts on the Hill to both, ensure that the Secret Service has the funding it needs and to ensure that it has the leadership it needs in order to actually be able to defend American leaders. So, we'll see what happens, but I predict some fairly significant changes within the Secret Service because, we've had some fairly high-profile failures over the course of the last few years, really. And needless to say, if something were to happen in the U.S. to one of our leaders, that would lead to chaos not only in the U.S., but in much of the free world.
Well, I also wanted to talk about one book where I think it will be a very popular book in the United States of America. Bob Woodward's War is the author and Washington Post associate editor's fourth book since Donald Trump's victory in 2016. The new book opens the aperture to reveal how a years-long political contest between Trump and President Joe Biden, and now Trump and Vice President Kamala Harris, the Democratic presidential nominee, has unfolded against the backdrop of cascading global crises from the coronavirus pandemic to Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Woodward revelation debate on whether Trump will sell out Ukraine to Kremlin. Analysts discuss whether new revelations in Bob Woodward's book confirm that Trump will serve Russia's interest. What's your expectation about this book?
So I think this book is coming at an important time. This is, one argument that I've made for a while now is that I really wish journalists like Bob Woodward would release some of these revelations, not necessarily wait until they have a book together to release these revelations, but rather do so at the most important moments in history for the American public and the American voters to understand what's going on. Of course, I understand the business pressures that force these journalists to wait until they have a book in order to obviously sell copies of that book with some of these revelations. But again, I think the American public would be better served if these incredible stories that he shares in the book were made public in a more timely fashion. That having been said, the thing that I saw from this book that just blew me away wasn't that Donald Trump gave coronavirus testing kits for dictator Putin's personal use, right? That was one of the revelations that came out. And, and that one, again, is somewhat surprising, but I don't find it fundamentally shocking. Instead, the thing that I find most fascinating about what Woodward said was that dictator Putin specifically told Trump that he doesn't want Trump to reveal that he gave these testing kits out. And Trump was like, all right, fine, I won't tell anyone. And Putin's like, no, you misunderstand me. I'm not doing this for myself. Like, nobody cares if people find out that I got these kits from you. I'm doing this for you, because people will be mad at you for giving me these kits. So the fact that Putin was looking out for Trump's best interests and making sure that Trump would not harm himself by publicly revealing that he gave these kits out to the Kremlin, that's pretty telling. Right? That Putin's looking out for Trump's best interests. Two, that Putin seems to understand Trump's interests sometimes better than Trump himself. That he understood that if Trump were to publicly reveal that he gave these kits out to Putin in real time, that could harm him politically in America. Now, of course, this happened roughly 4 years ago. I wish we had known about this 4 years ago. And unfortunately, we're only finding out about this today. But nevertheless, I think that the American public can look at this and can make their own decision. They can make their own judgments. Furthermore, I think the fact that Woodward revealed in this book that Trump spoke with Putin privately roughly 7 times since he left the office of the presidency, that's also pretty revealing, right? I mean, it shows that the relationship between Putin and Trump is one of a fair bit of familiarity. These are two people who know one another, who speak to one another. And the thing that really concerns me is we don't know the content of these conversations. We don't know the true nature of their relationship. The only, the only data that we have about this are the things that are revealed in this book, or the things that people like my friend Fiona Hill will come out with. Fiona was one of the most senior Russia advisors in Trump's administration. And she was telling me how in Helsinki, when he was president and when he was coming out with Vladimir Putin together, he said that Putin had promised him that he had not meddled in American affairs, and that Trump believed him. And this was despite the almost ubiquitous consensus among American intelligence agencies that Putin was lying. that Putin had in fact meddled in our internal elections. Trump decided to believe Putin over his own intelligence agencies. And the funniest part of all this story, and so funny that if you don't laugh, you cry, was that Fiona was telling me how she almost decided to fake a medical emergency to put a stop to this press conference because it was just so catastrophic to hear an American president say that he believed a foreign dictator over his own intelligence agencies. So anyway, these are the things that I think Woodward's book offers additional context in. It's something I wish we had known over the course of the last 4 years, but I do think it's something we can draw conclusions from today. So again, I can't pretend to predict what Donald Trump would do if he were president. I think we can only judge him based on the things he has already said and the things he has already done. And based on those things, I would be deeply, deeply concerned about whether or not he would continue to support Ukraine once he was in office, or truly whether or not he even understands the extent to which American interests are implicated in Russia's attack against countries like Ukraine. I hope there's someone in his future administration who might explain that to him. But again, based on everything we've seen so far, I am not confident that there will be.
Uriel, I so knew that the White House has no confirmation also of phone calls between former President Donald Trump and Russian leader, dictator Vladimir Putin, but this information is raising concerns. And really, I think that the White House is concerned over reports of potential phone calls between Trump and Putin. But we will see. Well, Mr. Epstein, thanks you for this interesting conversation. Thank you for supporting our country. And guys, subscribe on our YouTube channel, like this video, and see you soon.
Thank you very much.